Hey creatives, I've got some dye-based inks and some stencil work for you today. It's a simple way to make a colourful and interesting art piece. I'm using Cold Press Watercolor paper, and this one's quite a large pad, so I'm just going to cut it down to the size I need it. Now, if I'd had more time before making this film, I would have stretched my paper first, as this is going to be a really watery technique, so it will wrinkle the paper. Unfortunately I didn't, so I'm just going to tape the paper to the board with masking tape, and I'll just deal with the wrinkles later. And I like to press my masking tape to clothing or a cloth to de-sticky it a little and make it less tacky so that it's less likely to tear the paper when I remove it later. I'm going to use this stencil for the project. It's totally one of my favourites, and I've linked it in the description below along with everything else that I've used today so that you can find it easily. Now this is where the dye-based ink comes in. I'm using these lovely brush marker pens, and they come ready loaded with a dye-based ink. Now whenever I use colours that I haven't used before or I haven't used a lot of, and I must admit I haven't used these a lot yet, so I'm still testing them out, I always like to do a bit of a test beforehand and see how the colours work together. Now I've gone for a palette that I hope will mix well and I won't have any problems with it going to brown or grey or anything like that. But I do still have to be careful of colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. So I'm going to try and keep the greens and the purples separated from each other and use the blues as a buffer. And again, you can find these pens listed in the supply list below. Before I add my colour, I'm going to add a layer of water, and I'm just generously spraying the surface with water. Now I've not covered all of the paper. I'm kind of doing a diagonal line from the top left hand corner down to the bottom right hand corner. And you'll see when I start adding colour, it will just be a bit clearer then. Don't worry if the water has gone under the stencil, because as you'll see, it will be fine. So the fun bit, adding some colour. You can see I'm just very roughly putting the colour directly over that stencil and into the areas where there's lots of water with the brush markers. And I'm not really being too careful about it. The only thing I am being careful about is making sure that I've got purples at one end and green at the other. So hopefully I won't get a problem with those two colours mixing and going to that grey colour that I was getting when I tested them out directly with each other. I mean, it's already looking pretty yummy, isn't it? All that lovely colour. But if you think this looks yummy, just wait until I take the stencil away. But before I do that, I've got to wait for a lot of this to dry first. Now the paper is going to buckle, so I'm going to weight down the corners. And hopefully this will just extend how long the stencil is in contact with the paper before it all kind of wrinkles up and buckles a lot. And then it's just a case of letting it dry naturally. And I'm going to leave it to the point at which it is mostly dry, so most of the water is off. There's still a very small amount of droplets between the stencil and the paper surface. And you could happily wait until it was all dry, but again I'm a bit pushed for time, so I'm going to take a bit of a risk and remove my stencil. And look at that, how pretty is that? I mean, that's pretty cool just as it is. But I'm going to use it as the basis of a sketch. Well, not a sketch, more a doodle, and one of my pattern designs. But first I'm just going to remove it from my board and take off that tape really carefully so it doesn't tear the paper. And then I'm just going to use my heat tool to dry it off completely. I don't think you can really see it here, but the paper is quite buckled and wrinkled. I mean, it's not really bad, but it's still enough to make it a little bit too bumpy to draw straight on. So all I'm going to do is try and stretch it out a little bit and straighten it up. And another thing you can do is put it under a load of heavy books. So I'm going to stretch this out by hand, do my drawing, and then I'll probably leave it under some books for a good day or two. So I'm thinking that this technique would be really great for a whole range of different things. So for instance, these would make really great backgrounds for cards, wouldn't they? Let me know in the comments what you think you might use it for. I would love to hear. Also, please do let me know if you are enjoying this video and finding it useful by liking it. And do feel free to share it if you know other arty people who would enjoy it too. The more people we can get creating, the better. And if you'd like to become one of my subscribers, if you're not already, then I would love to have you on board. So please do subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next art and craft video. Now I particularly like the way that this technique works with these dye inks in this brush pen format. You get some really interesting feathering effects and even a touch of separation of the dyes in the ink as they've moved at different paces through the paper. and I think it just all kind of adds to the look. But you don't have to use just dye-based inks for this, you could use other inks as well, plus watercolour paints. Just apply them with a brush and play around and see what kind of effects you can make. Then come back here and tell me how you got on, or share with me on social media, and all my links are below in the description. So just link me up and I'll come over and have a look. And I can't wait to see what you make. I'm going to be back in a few days' time with a new art and craft video. In the meantime, here's some more video suggestions for things you might have missed. Feel free to have a catch up and to rummage through my channel to see what videos you might like to watch. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a really creative day, and I'll see you soon with my next video.